I never set out to become the kind of person whose life could be summed up by a headline, but if someone ever wrote about me, it would say something like, "Rescued dog rescues man, twice." My name is Daniel Harper, and 6 autumns ago I pulled over on a rainy stretch of highway to coax a mud-slick German Shepherd into the passenger seat. He was thin enough that I could trace each rib with my eyes. A ragged, ropey scar creased one ear, and the whites of his eyes showed in a way that made him look both terrified and stubbornly alive. He let me lift him into the car with a single, shuddering breath, and he stared at me the whole drive home as if memoizing my face, like a soldier learning a map of friendly territory. I gave him a bath in a tub meant for people, fed him chicken and rice, and watched him fall asleep against the baseboard heater with a sigh that seemed to last an entire minute. I named him Max because he felt like the most of something, the maximum amount of a dog that could be contained inside one animal, even when he was scarcely more than bones and a reluctant heartbeat. The vet said he was 2, no microchip, no collar, and the way she pursed her lips said she didn't want to guess aloud how he'd come by the cigarette burns speckling the skin beneath his fur. "He's a survivor," she said, and I said, "Me too," before I could help it. Because in those years after my father's sudden stroke and my mother's slow unraveling grief I woke some days surprised that I'd gotten through the night. Max learned the house in silence, room by room, as if filing away escape routes. He flinched at the metallic click of a belt, and he never accepted treats from my right hand if I was standing too close. But there was a peculiar gentleness to him, an intelligence that made him move like an extra thought in the room. He would sit at my desk while I worked remote IT tickets and tilt his head at things no one else could hear. He patrolled the windows at dusk and came back to me with the triumphant seriousness of a child delivering a secret. In time, he slept without waking at every sigh of the heater. In time, I laughed more than I frowned. In time, we built something like a small private country with its own flag and anthem and weather, and the weather was mostly bright. The first sign that weather could change came in late October, the kind of Pacific Northwest night that wears mist like a shawl. I came home to find the porch light flickering. Strange, I'd replaced that bulb, and Max greeting me with the frantic precision of a drill sergeant. He nosed my thigh, then sprinted to the hall, then back, nails clicking, a tightness in him that told me this was not about a squirrel or a lingering memory. He parked himself before the basement door and pressed his shoulder to it in a way that made my skin feel too small for my body. When I opened it, he didn't wait, he flowed down the steps in a controlled, predatory glide I'd never seen from him, and that's when I heard it, the faint metallic clink of a tool against concrete. I didn't breathe. For a second, the house felt like a stranger wearing a familiar coat. Max's bark detonated in the dark, followed by a curse too human to be anything but real. The rest happened the way any near violence happens, jerky, out of order, drenched in adrenaline. I called 911. I grabbed the old bed I kept by the door because once, years ago, a neighbor's husband had tried to make his grief into my problem and I'd promised myself I would keep some kind of hard object between me and sudden ruin. By the time I reached the bottom step, a man in a cheap black mask was raising a crowbar. Max launched. There is no better word. He struck like his name, maximum force, maximum purpose. The crowbar clanged to the floor. The intruder slammed into the shelving unit where I kept paint cans and a radio I never remembered to charge. Max's teeth did not close, they hovered at the man's throat like a spell, a warning older than language. The man froze. Sirens wailed and then were inside the house, officers shouting, everything a kaleidoscope of blue and white and legally mandated questions. The intruder had a slim Jim, a glass cutter, a pocket full of zip ties. He had come for something and would leave with handcuffs. Max had a gash on his front leg and a look in his eyes that made me realize he hadn't been pacing the house for months because he was anxious, he had been preparing. He had known, in some wordless way, that danger had ringed the yard and traced the window frames, and he had learned every doorway the way a chess player studies openings. At the emergency vet, when the sedative loosened his mouth and softened his gaze, I whispered, "I see you," because that's what I'd wanted someone to say to me for years, and I felt, ridiculous and large, like I might cry into his fur if I didn't look away. The police later told me the man was likely connected to a string of break-ins along the lakeshore, a crew that watched people's routines, that chose houses with ground-level basement windows and older alarms. They asked if I'd noticed anyone following me, any strange cars idling on the street. I hadn't. They asked if I had enemies. I said, only invisible ones. For a while, life returned to its normal posts and guard shifts. I worked, I ran trails with Max, we learned a new command together, back, because the vet suggested it might be helpful to give Max space to disengage after the adrenaline of the attack. He obeyed with the humility of someone who knows that obedience can be a door to freedom. Then winter laid a white hand on the city, and the second danger entered our house the way certain dangerous things do, silent, flavorless, pretending to be nothing. It was a Sunday, cold enough that the windows sang a little, and I'd moved my small portable generator from the shed to the garage because the power company had texted about rolling outages. The neighborhood had lost power twice that week, and I, smug in my preparedness, ran a thick orange extension cord under the side door to keep the fridge alive and my laptop charged while I executed backups for a client who could not imagine a world in which their data might vanish. I cracked the garage door out of respect for safety, just enough to see a ribbon of daylight, and told myself I was careful. By evening, the street's lights returned and I went to bed early, the generator cool, the garage door closed. Sometime around 3 a.m., I woke to Max standing on the bed, one paw on my chest, panting, eyes wide and glassy, nudging me hard enough that my head knocked the headboard. I swatted at the air, foggy and annoyed, but Max didn't relent, he kept pressing, whining in a thin, eerie tone I'd never heard before. Then I noticed the headache. The heavy, iron-colored nausea. The sense that the room was weirdly far away from me. Max seized the blanket in his teeth and dragged, really dragged, pulling with his whole body until I slid off the mattress onto the floor. He licked my cheek and then sprinted to the bedroom door and back, making a sound that somehow said, "Now." I stood, and the world tilted. He jammed himself against my knees to brace me, herded me down the hall, and led me not to the front door but to the kitchen, head-butting the deadbolt until I understood. Fresh air slapped me like a teacher. The cold night had never felt so full of oxygen. I bent double on the porch, gulping, the stars swinging like lanterns. It took minutes to realize what was happening, another minute to fumble the phone with hands that felt like borrowed mittens, and seconds for the 911 operator to say, in a voice that made everything suddenly real, "Sir, you're likely experiencing carbon monoxide poisoning. Get outside. Stay outside. Is anyone else in the home?" "Just my dog," I said, and Max, as if he knew, pressed his head into my hip like a seal. The firefighters found the source the way seasoned people find things, right away, with a grim cheerfulness that suggested they were more relieved than anything else. The generator, cooled and off, had still left a pall of carbon monoxide in the garage that lingered and seeped through the internal door because the weather stripping was older than I'd remembered. The concentration wasn't lethal, not yet, but the levels were rising. The monitor I'd purchased months ago, meaning to install, sat in its box inside the hall closet like a sealed warning. The EMT said, "Boy saved your life tonight." And my body decided the appropriate response was to sit very still and let gratitude rearrange the furniture inside me. After that, the house gained 2 carbon monoxide detectors, new weather stripping, a rule about generators that bordered on religious. But another change took hold, a quieter one, the feeling that the world had intentions. Not destiny, not punishment, just a texture of cause and effect you could miss if you moved too quickly. I began to notice the same silver Subaru idling at the end of the block on Thursdays. I noticed a thin man in a canvas jacket walking past my house with a package under his arm that never seemed to change shape or size. I told myself I was turning into one of those people who complained at town halls about teens and their skateboards. Still, Max tracked the street with a patience that suggested he had always known the world contained patterns and that he trusted them. One evening in early March, I came home to find my back fence gate swinging open. I could have sworn I'd latched it. I closed it, tested the bolt, and went inside. In the morning, it was open again. I changed the bolt. After work, open. The third time, I left it, because I am not brave but sometimes I don't like being told by fear what to do. I switched off the lights, sat in the dark by the kitchen window with a blanket around my shoulders, and listened to the backyard like it was a radio station that only played one song, the kind of stillness that makes a person lean closer. Max lay at my feet, not sleeping, his breath a metronome. It took 40 minutes for the figure to appear, a shadow that thickened into human, a man moving along the fence line with a posture that said he was trying to be a deer and failing. He slipped through the open gate, crouched by the basement window, the same one the break-in crew had favored, and produced from his coat a small, round object that glinted in the stray ambient light. Max lifted his head. I breathed once, twice, and then I stood and flipped the floodlight. The yard exploded into clarity. The man flinched, looked up, and in that second his face turned from an arrangement of features into a recognition. The intruder from October, or his twin, or someone taught by the same teacher. The court had released him pending trial. I'd missed the update because the world never arranges itself around your personal sense of closure. He ran. Max was through the door before I could form the thought don't. He took the steps like a spring uncoiling and crossed the grass so fast the man barely made the gate before Max was on him, not biting, not tearing, but anchoring, front paws braced, weight leaned into the man's thigh so that his next step failed him and he toppled, smacking his face on the dirt. I shouted, neighbors shouted, someone's porch light sprang awake. The man kicked, caught Max's ribs, and I felt the kick like it landed on the architecture of my own chest. Max absorbed it and did not yield. Police cars are louder when you want them, quieter when you don't. That night, they arrived with the sound a story makes when it finally decides where it's going. They arrested him with a wariness that suggested paperwork. One officer, a woman with a short scar tucked into her hairline, knelt to examine Max from a respectful distance and said, "This dog ever wear a vest?" I shook my head. "He's trained like a working dog," she said. "Or trained himself." The idea snagged something in me. Later, much later, a trainer would confirm it. Max had once been taught commands that didn't come from pet culture but from the world of search and rescue or protection work, an early life of purpose, misused or half-used, and then he'd been discarded when he became inconvenient or when someone cruel decided pain was more interesting than patience. Purpose without kindness makes monsters. Kindness without purpose makes ghosts. In Max, the two had met and laid down their weapons. After the second arrest, I thought maybe the line of trouble had finally run out, as if danger were a seam you could mine to exhaustion. Spring peeled winter off the trees, I planted tomatoes with ridiculous optimism, and Max supervised each seedling as if giving it a badge. On a warm Saturday in May, we hiked a trail at Rattlesnake Ledge, a place where the lake gleams like spilled metal and the pines ladder the sky. I am not a reckless hiker, I have a second-hand respect for gravity. But 2 miles in, where the trail narrows and the right side drops into a tumble of rocks and ferns, a boy of maybe 10 darted past us, sprinting as if the future had dared him to try it on for size, his father calling his name, Evan, too late, too soft. The boy's foot skidded on pea gravel, and in the half-second before consequences, his center of gravity tipped toward the drop. I don't remember deciding to move, only that my body recognized another version of me, the one who would stand still and watch the headline write itself, and rejected him entirely. I lunged. My hand caught the boy's wrist, skin hot and dry like something newly baked, and my shoes lost purchase. The world became a camera with a sticky shutter, frame of blue sky between black tree trunks, frame of my shoulder wrenching, frame of the boy's eyes, round and undefended, frame of dirt flying up in a spray. Then a force struck my hip from the side and drove me back into the trail's safer belly. Max, chest low, pushing, claws carving commas in the dust, anchoring me as if he were a rope and I was something worth hauling. The father reached us, grabbed his son, collapsed, the three of us a tangle of limbs and relief. The boy cried in that sharp, embarrassed way kids do when their bodies realize they are still available for use. I laughed until the laugh turned liquid. Hikers clapped because people crave choruses when they've avoided tragedy. And Max, self-contained, shook dirt from his fur and looked at me the way he had the night with the generator, as if to say, "Again? We do this again? Then we do this again." The father wanted to buy us dinner, a car, the moon. I told him I owned none of those things and needed none of them. What I needed, I realized later, was not outside me at all. That night, in the small house that had become more like the interior of a living tree, I pulled out the cardboard box where I'd packed away the few guesses about Max's past. The trainer's card that said she suspected search and rescue. The vet's chart with notes about scars arranged like a constellation. The adoption paperwork I'd filled out just to formalize what we already were. I googled nearby volunteer SAR groups, more to satisfy a feeling than to make a plan, and found a video from years ago, a news segment about a litter of shepherd pups rescued from an illegal training outfit in eastern Washington. The footage was grainy, but one pup, a shade darker than the rest, had the same thoughtful ears, the same slight kink in the tail. The story reported that only a few had been accounted for by rescues. Others had disappeared. A hole opened in the world where a fact should have been. Max slept nearby, twitching inside a dream, his paws moving in small cycles. I wanted to promise him that no one would ever again ask him to be brave for a reason that wasn't good. I wanted to promise him I would be enough reason. Summer brought calm the way a long exhale brings a body back to itself. Max learned to paddleboard with me, his front paws braced, his rear planted, his balance a poem about stability. He tolerated sunglasses if I put them on him outside the coffee shop for the amusement of children. He tolerated the children, too, as if he understood that everything has to practice being gentle. On the hottest night of August, lightning scribbled the mountains and a storm rolled down the valley with the unambiguous voice of weather that has done this before. At 2 a.m., thunder shouldered the house. I woke to the smell of something acrid and wrong. Max had already woken, he had already decided. He grabbed the sleeve of my t-shirt and tugged me toward the hall, then past the hall to the closet where the monitor for the old, long-unused security system hung like a retired athlete. "What?" I said, but he didn't want words. He wanted motion. Smoke pushed under the bedroom door like a draft with opinions. We went to our knees. The hallway was a cave thin as a throat. The world narrowed. Crawl, call 911. Remember the fireman's lecture about how low air stays cleaner. Remember that the back door sticks in humidity. I could hear the fire eating, a sound like someone tearing velvet. Sparks dusted the ceiling paint. The kitchen glowed in an orange not meant for kitchens. Outside, the storm answered the fire with rain but could not put it out. Max moved ahead of me, then behind, then ahead again, a shuttle weaving me along the only path I could survive. When we reached the kitchen, the wall near the breaker box wore flames like a beard. Later, the fire department would say an old wire in the wall had arced and found a scrap of dry lint in the cavity, a flirtation that became a marriage. In the moment, there was only heat and the way Max used his body to steer mine. He rammed the back door with his shoulder and then did it again. The frame groaned, the old wood relented. Rain stuffed the doorway with its cold urgency. I fell into it the way dehydrated ground drinks a downpour. We sprawled on the lawn together, ridiculous and holy and coughing. Neighbors gathered, faces lit by lightning and fear. The fire engine ate the street and then replaced the fire with a disciplined violence of its own. In the morning, the kitchen was a film of damp black. The wall wore a negative space where the breaker box had been. The air smelled of endings. The chief walked me through the ruin with the gentle briskness of someone who has seen worse and knows that comparisons are not a kindness. He asked if I had homeowner's insurance. I did. He asked if I had a place to stay. I did. My friend Mara from college had already texted me twice, the second time with her address arranged in the bossy sequence of a mother. Then he squatted to scratch Max behind the ear and said, "That dog is the reason we're not signing papers today." I looked down at Max, who looked back with the clear impatience of someone who thinks praise is fine but breakfast is better. I laughed, and the laugh arrived from a deeper place than any in years. In the weeks that followed, while insurance adjusters performed their bloodless alchemy and contractors measured my life in linear feet, I slept on Mara's couch and commuted to the damaged house to meet one expert after another. There is a particular humility in watching people who know how to rebuild things you only know how to live in. I learned the language of joists and vapor barriers. I learned patience that felt like exercise. And on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled like fresh drywall compound and coffee, a woman in a faded SAR t-shirt walked up the driveway, cradling a bag of donated pet food under her arm. "Heard about your dog through my buddy on the department," she said. "Name's Lisa. I run trainings for the County Search and Rescue K9 unit. I brought a little something and, well, I was wondering if I could meet your hero." Max greeted her as he greets most people, assessing, polite, ready to leave if he didn't like the story they told with their body. Lisa crouched sideways, said nothing for a whole breath, then offered her palm like a small boat. Max stepped forward and placed his paw in it, a gesture I'd never taught him. Lisa's eyes glinted. "That's an old foundational," she said softly. "We use it to teach mutual balance work on scree. He's done this before." We stood in the half-rebuilt kitchen while she explained how dogs like Max sometimes fall out of the official world, mistreated by bad actors, burned out by impossible handlers, or simply lost between the institutional cracks. "It's not that common," she said. "But common enough that I looked twice at a shepherd with his kind of eyes." She asked if I'd ever considered bringing him to a meet-and-greet session. "No pressure," she added. "He's already saved enough people for one lifetime." I looked at Max, at the plaster dust speckling his whiskers, at the way he leaned against my leg like an idea resting. The notion that he might want work, not as a penance or a test but as a form of joy, slid into me and made a home. We went, a week later, to a training field that smelled of cut grass and discipline. Max watched other dogs stream across the ground the way some people watch symphonies, with recognition and a hunger that isn't greed but belonging. Lisa set up a simple exercise: find a hidden volunteer, reward with praise and tug. Max hesitated the way you hesitate before stepping into cold water, then submerged himself. He quartered the field with a method that looked like prayer and found the lost woman beneath a camo tarp in under a minute, then stood, head high, and barked once, sharp and declarative. I felt something in my chest echo the bark. After, in the car, he slept with his mouth open like a tired child. He snored. I drove home slower than usual, as if movement could dislodge the day. Here is the part where a person typically declares a lesson, distills chaos into a smaller liquid that goes down easily. I don't have one. I have only this: I rescued a dog, and then I learned rescue is not a direction but a circle. Max saved me from a man who thought my home was a container for his wants. He saved me from a gas you cannot see. He saved a boy whose future will now contain rainstorms and birthdays. He saved me from a version of myself that assumed I was alone in my house even when love was standing right there, wearing fur, insisting on the door. He will save no one someday, because someday he will sleep and not wake up, because every story has an end that isn't a moral but a threshold. Until then, each morning he trots into the yard at dawn and stands very tall, scanning, as if he can see the map of our day rising from the grass. I pour coffee. The steam makes the air look alive. Max returns to the door and waits, not impatient because patience is his native language now, and I let him in, and he touches his nose to my knee, and I say, "Good morning, buddy, but what I mean is thank you, what I mean is I see you, what I mean is stay, as long as you want, stay."